Good morning from Mississippi,
So, good
everyone.
morning. It is morning time in Mississippi. It's a little wet today, so it's a good day to look at a good book. We are going to be starting in page 40.
Today we will continue study and learning good life book.
This is a book that was written by Robert Waldinger and Marc Schulz, The Good
Okay.
Life,
Yeah.
and it's lessons from the world's longest scientific study of happiness.
Yes.
3 generations and going.
What is the money for? Correct?
Yeah, what is the money for?
Uh-huh.
In 2010, Angus Deaton and Daniel Kahneman at Princeton University tried to quantify the relationship of money to happiness using a year-long Gallup survey that resulted in a massive data set of 450,000 daily responses from a nationally representative sample of 1,000 people. Deaton and Kahneman showed that in the United States, $75,000 seemed to be a kind of magic number at that time. Once a household income was more than $75,000 per year, which was close to the average family income in the US at the time of the study, the amount of money that people earned showed no clear relationship to daily reports of enjoyment and laughter, which was used as indicators of an emotional well-being. So this study finding seems to reinforce the idea that money can't buy happiness. But the other half of the finding was equally as significant. For those making less than $75,000 per year, more income did correlate modestly with more happiness. People during this time period in 2010, that people that averaged $75,000 a year, family income, not really experience a lot more happiness. But people that made under that, if they made 75,000, they were happy.
Or it mean like if they compare in the past.
Yes. So when money is scarce and basic needs cannot be met with certainty, life can be incredibly stressful. And in this situation, every dollar matters. Having a basic amount of money allows people to meet those needs, have some control over life, and in many countries, affords access to better health care and living conditions. When money is really tight or scarce, and any extra money that comes into that household affords better access to health care and living conditions. Now, the study by Deaton and Kahneman is memorable for establishing a dollar amount where happiness plateaus. But the meaning of the study is not new. It is largely consistent with other research that has used different methods and been conducted across multiple countries and cultures that vary in wealth. These studies have paid attention both to how money affects individuals' happiness and to whether increasing wealth for an entire nation affects the overall happiness of the population. Regardless of their methods and locations, these studies point to a similar conclusion. Money matters most at lower levels of income, where a dollar, euro, rupee, or won is used to provide basic needs and a sense of security. Once you get beyond that threshold, money does not seem to matter as much, if at all, when it comes to happiness. As Deaton and Keatonman wrote in their study, more money does not necessarily buy more happiness, but less money is associated with emotional pain.
More money does not necessarily buy more happiness, but less money is associated with emotional pain.
If you make more money than a certain amount, that extra money does not buy you extra happiness. But if you make under a certain amount of money and you cannot afford health care or in good living conditions, then it is associated with emotional pain. Here it says at lower levels of income, money brings tangible benefits that are necessary for survival, safety, and a sense of control. But at slightly higher levels of income, and this needn't be $75,000, the meaning of money starts to become somewhat more abstract and becomes about other things like status and pride. Maybe none of this comes as a major surprise to you. Maybe for you, money is not about stuff and not about status, but about freedom. Money has a lot of power in the world, you might think, and the more money I have, the more control, choice and control I have. That's what a lot of people believe.
They're thinking about that is power of money. Okay.
Yes. It's understandable to feel this way. Money is woven deep into the foundations of modern societies. It is tied to achievement, to status, to self worth, to feelings of freedom and self determination, to our ability to care for and give joy to our family, to fun, to everything. It's natural that we see it as a central medium through which we interact with the world and pursue so many things. Once you get beyond that survival need, I think, then money starts getting tied up to achievement, to status, to self worth, all those other things that were discussed here. I think to our ability to care for and give joy to our family. Even Leo DeMarco, the teacher who built his life around connections with his family and students, was very conscious about or of money. In addition to his careful retirement savings, he set aside a small amount of for many years and used those savings to buy a fishing boat, which his oldest daughter named Dolores. That boat featured in all of his children's memories. Leo used money as a means to achieve some satisfying personal ends that connected him to the people he cared about. So while he did not make as much money as other student John, he still used his money carefully to satisfy some personal needs of his family and his. However, when money becomes the point rather than the tool, it joins ranks with other persistent objects of desire that are imbued with importance by culture around us. Things like fame and career success, or as Richard Sement and Jonathan Cobb framed it in their book, The Hidden Injuries of Class, badges of ability, that is, personal merits that are publicly acknowledged. Basically, are saying that when you go beyond a certain point in income, it no longer becomes satisfying for personal end. It becomes badges of ability. Oh, this is mine. Most people don't have it. Just us, us wealthy people. So it becomes a status symbol. Those items, planes, yachts, cars, homes, mansions, they all become status symbols. I can do this, you can't. I think you could call it, I love me.
I love me so much. Okay.
Some of our happiness also depends on what we see when we look at our neighbor. It is human nature to compare ourselves to others. How big is the gap between the lives we see around us in entertainment and social media and what we believe is possible in our own lives? Research has shown that the more we compare ourselves to others, the less happy we are. And the bigger the disparities we see, the greater our unhappiness. Our money effects on us is simple and it's complicated. But maybe the reason we never find an answer to the question, can money buy happiness,
Can money buy happiness?
is because we're asking the wrong question. So we always compare our lives with others.
What if the right question is,
Maybe the right question is, what actually makes me happy? A boy from Charleston. When Alan Silva was 14 years old, he was in love with the movies. In the summer of 1942, he got a job shining shoes in Thompson Square so that twice a week he could head over to a theater in Charleston and spend his afternoon with James Cagney or Susan Hayward. He'd go with friends, and when they weren't around, he'd go by himself. He'd see every movie twice, and if it wasn't good, the second time he'd complain to the ticket taker. On the way home, he might detour to the Charleston Marina to see who he could find, since he was part of the Community Sailing Club, a local organization that taught kids to sail. If nothing too interesting was happening at the marina, he'd head up to Chelsea Street and wait for the right kind of delivery truck to drive by, one with a handrail on the back, so he could sneak up behind and hop a ride home. He kept that part a secret. He doesn't do any truck hopping, his mother told the Harvard study. I've warned him about losing legs. Like most of Boston kids in the study, the Silva family lived in poverty. Alan's father was a Portuguese immigrant and worked as a machinist at the Navy Yard, and his income was just enough to keep food on the table. Alan, an excitable, busy kid, was blissfully unaware of the financial stress his parents experienced. The researcher who interviewed him at 14 described him as wildly adventurous. He comes running in all out of breath, his mother said, and then he just talks. She was inclined to allow him some freedom, something her mother-in-law, who lived with them in their three-room apartment, always complained about, since she thought Alan would get into the wrong group, start stealing, and his life would go down the drain. I'm not too strict, his mother said. I let him do what other kids do. It's normal. My mother was too strict and it made me moody. Now I read child psychology books. Now, in addition to being adventurous, Alan was ambitious. Young boy talks about his family being poor, that they had a lot of stress because of financial problems. It talks about his father was an immigrant, had a low-paying job. That's why they were in poverty. He barely made enough money to feed his family.
His name is Alan
Silva. If he wasn't at the movies or sailing or hopping truck, he was home tinkering with a erector set that his father bought him for Christmas. He wanted to learn everything he could about building things. He believed he had control over his life, which led him to believe something many other Boston kids in the study didn't, that he could go to college. The two groups of Harvard study, the Boston man and the Harvard man, are different in many ways. Taken together, the two reflect some hard realities about the effect of poverty and the difference in life outcomes between the working class and the professional class. But certain relational advantages retain their power across this social economic divide. In Alan Silva's case, he had a mother who loved him. She advocated for him, believed in him, and supported his aspirations. Thanks in part to her encouragement and support, Alan Silva was one of the few Boston men who went to college. Shortly after graduating with a degree in electrical engineering, He was hired by the telephone company and had a long career, retiring at age 56.
He succeeded because his mom taught him.
She supported him. She encouraged him.
Encourage, yes, encourage.
His mother loved him. She advocated for him, believed in him, and supported his aspirations. Alan had full support of his mother. She encouraged him to do whatever he truly desired. 95.
95, he has a long life.
Alan doesn't care for new movies, but he catches some of his old favorites on TV. When we asked him in 2006 what he was most proud of in his life, he did not talk about his career or his college degree. We'll be married 48 years this year. Children turned out good and grandchildren too. I'm proud of my family. Alan's story brings to life the lesson of the Harvard study on the power of relationships, and it reminds us of an important truth. All of us have a rich mix of things we can't control and things we can. Each of us must find ways to work with the hand we're dealt.
Aaron, he succeed in his life. Part of that is from relationship.
Well, they asked him what he was the most proud of in his life.
Oh.
What thing he did that gave him the most pride. He didn't say it was movies. He didn't say it was a career.
Okay.
What he said was, we'll be married 48 years this year. The relationship, turned out, his children turned out good and grandchildren too. I'm proud of my family.
He think about
he talked about his family. I'm proud of my family. Relationships. This reminds us of an important truth that there's many things we can and cannot control, but each of us must find a way to handle the things we're given in life.
What actually make me happy? Okay, now, how much of our happiness is under our control?
Now, happiness and freedom begins with a clear understanding of one principle. Some things are within your control, and some things are not. Epictetus Discourses, another of the great Greek philosophers, was born a slave, so the question of control was personal to him. We don't even know the name his mother gave him. Epictetus is a Greek word meaning acquired. When we obsess over things that fall outside of our control,
Epictetus
said that we make ourselves miserable. So an important project of life is distinguishing which is which. And what I'm discovering here is I need to practice my Greek names. The theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, Serenity Prayer is a modern version of this idea, and while the original version is somewhat different, it is commonly quoted in this way: God, grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. People often think, for understandable reasons, true happiness is beyond reach for me because there is so much that I can't help that is set in stone. I'm not genetically gifted. I'm not extroverted. I endured trauma in my past and am still struggling with it. I'm not privileged in the ways that seem to advantage others in this imbalanced and unfair world. People often think that for understandable reasons.
happiness is beyond reach for me. Because there is so much that I cannot help that is set in stone.
Person said that change is possible, but sometimes it takes a while. Now, lots of things matter in the lottery of life. We may not like it, but there are things we're born with or born into that affect our well being, also beyond our immediate personal control. Genetics matter, gender matters, intelligence, disability, sexual orientation, race, and all these matters, of course, because our cultural bias and practices. Black Americans, for example, are one of the least advantaged, if not the least advantaged group in the United States. On average, Black Americans have less savings, higher rates of incarceration, and poorer health, outcomes that in any other racial group, all of which contribute to a persistent economic disadvantage that is difficult to break out of. And as Deaton and Kahneman's study and many others show, social economic status can have an effect on emotional well being. Some groups of people, disadvantages prevent them from stepping above their current standing. That's what this is saying. But some of the other people we've studied, like Alan Silva, he started off disadvantaged. He went above and he became successful in life. This is true that social economic disadvantages do occur, but there are people who can step above and beyond. So this brings us back to the Harvard study
Mm-hmm.
and an important question about its ethnic makeup. How could the lives of white men like John Leo and Henry, men who grew up in America in the middle of the 20th century, have anything to say about modern women or people of color, about people from entirely different countries, cultures, and backgrounds? Aren't the findings of the Harvard study only relevant to the demographics of its participants? So when Marc is asked this question, he thinks of a startling and influential paper published in the Journal of Science. The paper sought to determine if there was a link between social connection and the risk of dying at any age, and it looked at both women and men from 5 studies conducted in 5 different places around the world. One of these places was Evans County, Georgia. Another was Eastern Finland. There are probably few greater contrasts than the life of a black woman who grew up in the American South in the 1960s and the life of a white man living on the shores of a frozen lake in Finland. At just about any level of experience you can imagine, one would expect to see some major differences. All 5 studies were prospective and longitudinal. Like the Harvard study, they looked at lives as they unfolded over time. For both men and women, geography and race mattered, as they do in many studies. Individuals in Evan County had the highest mortality rates in the study on average, and those in eastern Finland had the lowest. Within Evans County, blacks had a higher risk of dying at any point in their lives than whites did. Though the difference was relatively small when compared to the differences between Finland and Evans County. Taken together, these differences are stark and meaningful. But this is only a part of the story. Now, pulling back a bit more, the data for the men and women in all 5 locations display a remarkable similar pattern. People who were more socially connected had less risk of dying at any age, whether you were a black woman in rural Georgia or a white man in Finland. The more connected you were, the lower your risk of dying in any given year. That's pretty significant.
Mm.
What they're saying with this portion here, the Harvard study talks about white men, poor white boys, or poor people from Boston.
Uh-huh.
Other studies have, okay, what about different cultures and races?
Mm-hmm.
What about black
Mm.
women, black men?
Mm-hmm.
What about location? It was a paper published in the journal Science. This sought to determine if there was a link between social connection and the risk of dying at any age. And it looked at both women and men from 5 studies. They incorporated other studies. In this book, even though this was written with the Harvard research in mind, they also took other studies. They sort of combined this information.
Oh, yes, I remember. Yeah.
The British cohort studies studied a group of women. Dunedin multidisciplinary health and development study
in
New Zealand. Children born in a small New Zealand city in 1972, followed them into middle age, and now it's following their children. Hawaii, and they looked at Japanese, Filipino, and Hawaiian heritage.
Okay, and another study is
The
in
Chicago Health, Aging, and Social Relations.
Group of
Men
and women. Okay, neighborhood of
diversity across the lifespan. And that's thousands of black and white adults in the city of Baltimore.
Another study is from
Student Council study tracking the lives of men and women who were elected student council representatives at 3 different colleges.
This book,
well, it's taken a lot of data from studies, not just the own study.
They start with the student from Harvard University.
Yes.
They compiled
the data.
The data from another studying.
And then they added a group of low-income people to the Harvard study because the original Harvard study just dealt with upper class white. That's why they added the lower income people, was so that they would have a better pool of information to draw data from.
This consistency of finding across different locations
and demographic groups is what scientists call replication, the holy grail of research, and not easily to come by. Just because a scientific study found something interesting does not mean that the matter is settled. Good science requires the findings to be replicated, especially when the object of study is something as complex as human life. It is crucial that we find a consistent signal across many studies, all pointing in a similar direction. Only then can we have confidence that what we're seeing is not a fluke. More than 20 years after this analysis of 5 studies, a much larger study cemented the connection between relationships and the risk of mortality. Julian Holt Lindstedt and her colleagues look at 148 studies conducted in countries all over the world: Canada, Denmark, Germany, China, Japan, Israel, and others, with a combined total of more than 300,000 participants. This analysis echoes the findings of the study highlighted in the article in Science. Across all age groups, genders, and ethnicities, strong social connections were associated with increased odds of living longer.
All
genders and ethnicities,
strong social connection were associated with increased odds of living longer.
In fact, Holt Lindstedt and her colleagues quantify the association. Incredibly, social connection increases the likelihood of surviving in any given year by more than 50%. So social connection increases the likelihood of surviving in any given year by more than 50%. Pretty impressive.
Yes. Across all of these studies,
The mortality rate of individuals with the fewest ties was between 2.3 men and 2.8 women, times higher than the individuals with the most ties. Death rate for people with the fewest ties was between 2.3 and 2.8 times higher.
It means if you don't have enough connection,
there's a greater chance of you dying. Now, these are very large associations. It's comparable to the effects of smoking on getting cancer. And smoking in the United States is considered the leading cause of preventable death. So, Holt-Lundstad study was done in 2010. As time goes on, study after study, including our own, continues to reinforce the connection between good relationships and health, regardless of a person's location, age, ethnicity, and background. Although the life of a poor Italian kid who grew up during the Great Depression in South Boston and the life of a 1940 Harvard graduate who went on to become a senator are quite different from each, and even more different from a modern woman of color, we all share a common humanity. Like the Holt-Lundstad Review, analysts of hundreds of studies tell us that the basic benefits of human connection do not change much from one neighborhood to the next, from one city to the next, from one country to the next, or from one race to the next. It is indisputable that many societies are unequal. There are cultural practices and systematic factors causing significant amounts of inequality and emotional pain. But the capacity of relationships to affect our well-being and health is universal. The capacity of relationship will affect well-being and health. It doesn't matter how much or money we have, where we are socially, but if we have good relationships, then our health and well-being is better.
As we
Proceed, we'll focus on identifying what you can do, regardless of the society you live in or the color of your skin. We will highlight the malleable factors that have been shown to affect an individual's
quality of life
across many disparate circumstances. Factors that can have an impact on your life and that are under your control. But what kind of impact? How important are the things we can't change versus the things we can? Now, we're asked this question a lot in different forms. One of us will be discussing our research after a talk or in a casual setting. Suddenly, someone will develop a worried look, and we can almost hear the question before it's asked. If my main worry is money and health care, is there any relevant to me? As they discuss their research with their group, occasionally they'll have someone gets a strange look on their face, and they can hear the question almost before it's asked. If my main worry, if what I worry about the most is money and health care, does any of this relate to me? Does any of this affect me? Another one that might be asked, if I'm shy and have trouble making friends, is the good life for me out of reach? These are questions people ask. Or as one woman recently asked Bob, if I had a bad childhood, am I just totally screwed?
Saying something matters and saying it seals
one's fate are two very different things. In science, researchers focus on finding differences between groups. We use the unfortunate word statistically significant to note when these differences seem reliable. Very small differences, however, can be statistically significant. So small that they are practically meaningless, So, in addition to saying these factors matter, we need to think about how much they matter. We use the unfortunate words statistically significant to note when these differences seem reliable. Chapter 2 also says that money does not make happiness.
The money doesn't
Make you
make
happy.
you happy. We'll continue studying tomorrow. Bye bye for now. Have a good day from Mississippi.
Have a good day. Hopefully, for the people in the northern part of the U.S., you get through the cold, the snow, and the ice. Keep happy as you can.